Good afternoon and welcome to the University of Melbourne's panel conversation on a circular economy for infrastructure is the only way forward. My name is Felix Hui and I'm a senior lecturer at our faculty's Infrastructure Engineering Department, University of Melbourne. I would like to formally welcome you to this event. I'd like to start today's event by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we are hosting this webinar, and pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Infrastructure such as transportation, energy, water, waste management is a critical part of any cities, society, and economy. It's like the glue that holds together the cities and the communities that live in it. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is capable of tackling climate change and keeping us resilient and safe in pandemics and times like this. At the same time, we also have to ensure that our infrastructure is built and operated do not deplete our limited natural resources, and they operate as part of the new circular economy, where these resources are recycled and upcycled for reuse in new applications. So more than just being circular, there's also need for parts of the infrastructure to be interconnected so that it can leverage clearer, insightful data to manage energy, water, waste, and transport as a system of systems. The World Economic Forum has been emphasizing the need to address the connections and the interdependencies between our infrastructure sectors and systems. And this will give the communities what they need to flourish. Here in Australia, we have a long list of infrastructure projects, and many of these are big mega projects which are normally procured by the government through contracting mechanisms. So these projects will need to align with the new circular economy, and Infrastructure Australia is already working to promote circular infrastructure in its priority infrastructure list. Our University of Melbourne's infrastructure platform aims to address some of these our society's biggest ongoing challenges and inform for sustainable solutions. So we do this through 4 themes or critical pillars. So today's event is part of the mega projects, procurement and circular economy theme. So through today's webinar, we hope to create discussion opportunities, engage in dialogue, and use this as a platform as a springboard for industry academia collaborations to engage in circular economy. I will encourage you to find out more and to reach out to us if you have an interest in this area. So for today's seminar topic, we are asking the question, what research and development is needed to make our sector interconnected so that we can leverage clearer, insightful data to enable a circular economy? So for today's event, we have invited a number of distinguished speakers who do amazing work in this area. They'll talk about their experiences and they'll share their thoughts in this area. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our panel discussion chair, Mr. Mark Allen, who is the Acting Director, City Design Studio at the City of Melbourne. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Felix, for that warm welcome. And I very much appreciate being here. And good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to our exciting discussion. Today's topic, a circular economy for infrastructure, is the only way forward. This is the second in a series of sustainable built environment panel discussions that the university's Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology have hosted. And let me begin by reminding everyone in attendance that today's event is being recorded. The video of the webinar will be put up on the university's Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology web page. Before we proceed with the panel discussion, I would like to take a moment to thank you for joining us today and to invite you to interact by leaving questions for our speakers in the Q&A box to the right-hand side of your screens. Some of you have submitted questions via the registration form, and thank you for those. But if the conversation sparks further thoughts or questions, I'd encourage you to engage with the panel through writing new questions so that we can upvote your questions, and they'll be the ones that you would most like to hear answered. So please like them if you're so inclined. So, okay, let's get started and introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Ari Hammerschlag. Ari is a chartered civil engineer who leads the Built Environment Sustainability team at GHD in Victoria. Prior to starting at GHD, Ari worked overseas in the UK, Middle East and Europe for over 5 years. Ari's background is in sustainable infrastructure planning and design for land use and development projects, with experience working in land use planning, city master planning, developing sustainability frameworks, highway, stormwater design and development feasibility. So welcome, Ari.
Thanks, Mark.
Our second speaker is Marty Disfani. Marty is an associate professor in geotechnical engineering at the University of Melbourne, leading research on experimental investigations of granular geomaterials. Marty is currently representing Australia on the ISSMGE technical committees for transport geotechnics and the TC 220 field monitoring in geomatics. He is a member of Standards Australia CE009 Testing for Soils for Engineering Purposes Committee. So it's great to have you here today, Marty, and welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. Our third speaker is Phil Brunston. Phil is a chartered civil engineer for Arup in Melbourne with 9 years experience in design and construction of a variety of civil engineering projects, including site development, road and rail infrastructure, flood alleviation. As a design manager, Phil continues to explore opportunities to apply circular economy principles throughout the project lifecycle, from reduction of materials at the earliest stages of design to supporting regenerative design and the application of recycled content in material specification. So welcome, Phil.
Hi, good to be here.
And our final speaker is Patricia Lavieri. Dr. Lavieri is a lecturer in transport engineering at the University of Melbourne, and her goal is to contribute to the development of more sustainable, equitable and smart transport systems. Her research focuses on demand modelling for emerging transport technologies and services such as ride-hailing, bike sharing, e-scooters, e-bikes and electric, connected and automated vehicles. She has worked together with the public and private sectors, both in the United States of America and in Australia, to develop proof of concept ECAV technologies and expand the knowledge of consumer acceptance and use of emerging transport services. Hello, Patricia, it's great to have you here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Great. So the format today is I'll ask each of our eminent speakers to address a couple of questions for a moment, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So let me start with you, Ari. Can you provide some good examples of circular economy and infrastructure which you've seen from around the world, and those that could be implemented in Australia?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. So as you said, I've had amazing opportunities to work around the world. And what I've found is that circular economy almost becomes a necessity on projects or developments that are in remote locations where you don't have access to grid supply of infrastructure such as energy and water. So I've worked on a number of remote island developments where self-sufficient networks are required, and therefore the reuse of resources is very much implemented. So some ideas that I've been exposed to which have been really interesting have been opportunities where there has been on-site desalination, so the use of seawater to create potable water, and then the treatment of wastewater, so any water that's used on site. And then what they've done with that treated wastewater is mix it with the brine residue residue that comes from the desalination process to reduce the salinity before putting it back into the ocean. So it really provides a complete circular economy on the water use, taking it from the ocean, using it, then taking the waste from the use of humans, and then sort of putting it back in. Other projects I've worked on, like energy from waste facilities that essentially use waste to create energy, I've worked on projects where they've co-located new industrial parks or developments adjacent to these facilities, so that any energy that's used is efficiently provided to sites adjacent to it, so there's no loss of energy through long transmissions. So there's a lot of great initiatives like that where you have co-location and you look at resource as a scarcity and therefore utilize circular economy for those purposes.
Fantastic, Ari. Thanks for that. And just with some of those exciting projects that you mentioned, any major barriers to seeing some of those perhaps implemented in Australia?
Yeah, I think the big barrier is coordination, and Felix sort of touched on at the beginning. Circular economy works at economies of scale. The greater the amount of people involved in sharing resource, the more effective and cost and efficient the process is. So I think it's that coordination piece of major infrastructure projects talking to one another and understanding what resource is available and what can be shared from project to project, which is a barrier that can be broken down through an increase in digital, an increase in sort of willingness to commit to circular economy to improve that within Australia.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Now, I've got a couple of questions for Phil. I'll sort of start with how can a design team contribute to a circular economy for infrastructure? And maybe what are some of the biggest challenges that the design teams that you lead or others face in delivering on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think it's from my touch points on projects right from early phase development all the way through to construction, you can see opportunities. But really, so we really need to influence the whole project life cycle and across all disciplines. And really, the highest value comes in that concept development stage when you can look at high value strategic initiatives. But then as you go through the design development, there's a lot of focus on reducing the footprint of infrastructure, as well as if you're in a project with existing infrastructure, how can we extend the life of that? So reusing or rehabilitating existing pavements in the construction. So and as you develop those designs, what opportunities are there to future-proof your design by designing structures for disassembly or adaptability? And then finally, really that speccing of reuse and recycled materials once you've got a sort of final design. I think the key challenge is infrastructure is delivered to very complex systems, large complex systems. So there needs to be a lot of effective planning and collaboration throughout project lifecycle to make the initiatives that are dreamt up in the early phases a reality when you come to build at a later stage.
Yeah, fantastic. Just as a sort of follow-on to that, Phil, just in terms of that complexity of particularly large-scale infrastructure projects, can you talk a little about how you see a role for standards and specifications and reference guides to how we might sort of manage recycled materials and where those gaps and opportunities lie?
Yeah, so I guess building on the experience I've had with the Ecologic program and helping develop some reference guides for recycled materials is that, there's a heap of standards and specifications out there with certain requirements or performance requirements. And those standards do have opportunities for reuse and recycled materials, but it's not always, in your face that this is a circular economy principle, and if you do this requirement, you'll achieve circularity. So it's about getting a deep understanding of the standards. So exploring that, and that's really where reference guides can help to draw out those opportunities and gaps. So when we identify those gaps, it's working, particularly with major projects, working with industry, the supply chain, and the asset owners, maintainers of roads and rail to adapt and improve standards and specs to elevate those opportunities for reuse and recycle materials.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Turning to Marty. Marty, you're researching recycling of materials. Can you tell us a little bit about that research and what you're currently doing and where you think that might lead us?
Thank you again for the opportunity, and hello to everyone who is listening. I started researching recycled material around 12 years ago, and we started with recycled glass, crushed brick, crushed concrete, material that's these days are commonly taken and used, but back then I remember a lot of people would still treat them as waste. There has been a long journey and some good progress, definitely. One lesson that I learned at the start of journey was that for recycled material uptake in any application, well, of course, you need to meet the specification. If you are using glass in road, you need to make sure that the product performs at the required level. But it became clear to me that if I want my research to have a wider impact behind some publications and research conferences, that two other aspects needs to be considered. One is that I need to have an understanding of the cost, that the product that I'm using, what's the cost of the recycled product, and what is it that I'm trying to replace. And also the volume, the applications that suggest uptake of large volumes of recycled material are more successful. So my latest research, which started 5 years ago, was about use of recycled tire aggregate or waste tires. It's a major issue in Australia, and the issue has become more significant since there is a ban on export of waste. I got to know that tires are made very extremely well these days. There is a lot of engineering goes into making tires. The product is highly resilient, has significant capacity of load and unload as you drive with the car. And then we use those tire aggregates in a new permeable pavement, which is relatively a new industry in Australia. So we developed what we started to call it a waste tire permeable pavement in the lab in 2017. Then we did a field trial in Adelaide with City of Mitcham. It received multiple awards. The product, to just go back to the points I made, the product offers a better performance at a lower cost and a lower maintenance. And of course, it uses a large volume of tire, up to 3 tires per square meter. So I didn't want to stop there, and we started a startup out of University of Melbourne. So that product was eventually commercialized, licensed, and there is a company now that when I actually quite feel proud that the research I've done, when I walk around the neighborhoods and city, I can see projects that are using that product. So I think it's important for people that they do research in this area, even though we are researchers and we shouldn't have really cost and other things in mind, but to have a look at that, that I'm suggesting something to be used. Does it financially make sense, for example, to use recycled tire, which is $600 a ton in Australia, instead of sand, which is probably around $20 a ton? If it doesn't make sense, maybe I should go and look around for other applications.
Oh, no, I think they're very important aspects. So let's put some recycled tires on a time machine, Ari, and go into the future. Where do you see us and use of recycled materials? Can you paint us a picture of where you think we might travel to?
So was that question for me or for Marty?
Oh, I beg your pardon, Ari. I meant Marty. Sorry, Marty. Do you want to give us a snapshot of the future for recycled materials in a transportation setting?
Look, I think in future, and I've seen it over the last 12 years, we'll have much more options to choose. So that's a good. That's very good for operators, the firms that they are building these projects. Let's say North-East Link project. They'll have much more options to choose from, and there would be competition between different recycled products. I think there would be new recycled and waste product that we need to use and look into the solar panels. The more we put them on the roofs, I think their lives will come to an end, and that's something I think it's out of my area really. But I think with the scarcity of water resources, water recycling would be a very large and major issue. We cannot really waste any more water. And I think recycling of energy, there are people that energy is not a material, but it can be recycled. As to give you an example, in Europe now, the heat generated on tunnels use this to then warm up water for hospitals or swimming pool. You don't dump the energy or you don't waste it, you move it from a location to location. So I think with the time passing, we will see be more recycled material, but also recycling of energy and water becoming more important and also more present.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And really appreciate your thoughts. So, Patricia, can you outline some of the challenges that electric vehicles bring in terms of infrastructure needs and how integrated energy and transport planning may assist us in that area?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having me again. I'm currently working in this project that integrates the transport, the energy, and the consumer perspective in trying to forecast and be proactive into planning for the future needs in our energy networks for when electric vehicles come. So it's been an interesting learning opportunity. So in terms of energy production and distribution, low electric vehicle penetration requires just small upgrades and investments. However, investment needs jump rapidly as the number of EVs increase and reach the majority of consumers. That's because as EV uptake increases, there is a potential for a substantial increase in peak electricity demand. For example, imagine if everyone decides to arrive home from work and put their vehicles to charge at the same time that we already have all other appliances in our households being used. So this increase in demand would require significant network and generation investment. To show just some figures to illustrate what I'm talking about, if you consider national averages of distance traveled and energy consumption in Australia, 3 of electric vehicles are equivalent to 1 household in terms of monthly electricity consumption. Considering the current car fleet numbers and the current number of households, we pretty much have 3 times more cars than households, which means that if all vehicles became electric tomorrow, we would have pretty much double the electricity demand than we have today. So in this sense, more than ever, electricity production needs to be planned from a circular economy perspective, because we need to maximize the use of renewable energy if we're going to double the demand. And that's where my research comes into play, because it's necessary to integrate energy and transport planning to address that. For example, if charging infrastructure and electricity tariffs are taken into consideration when and where people travel, it's possible to manage electric vehicle charging to actually help the energy system transition into renewable energy generation. Because renewable energy sources do not produce electricity on demand like fossil fuel power plants do, it's more important than ever to direct consumption, to guide consumers to charge their vehicles during the best times for the electricity production system. And this can be done through tariffs. For example, you can make energy cheaper when you are producing more electricity. In this case, if you are using solar energy, you produce more electricity midday, right? So you need to understand, where are vehicles during midday? Oh, most of them are parked in workplaces. So, okay, if you want to boost the use of solar energy for EV charging, you need to have the correct infrastructure placed in workplaces. So again, that's an example of how the integration of transport and energy planning is very important. If you want to maximize the use of wind energy, for example, you're going to need dynamic tariffs so that users will charge so that you can incentivize users to charge when energy is cheaper and I mean when you have a greatest production of through wind energy. Another capability that electric vehicles have, which has been widely studied right now, is called vehicle to grid, which means vehicles can be charged when you have the greatest production of electricity, either through solar or wind, and when then electricity is going to be the cheapest, and then they could potentially sell the electricity back to the system during other times when you have peak demand and electricity is highest. So again, the electric vehicles could have this potential to maximize and facilitate the transition into renewable energy. Again, this is to illustrate how integrated planning of transport and energy systems become very important to enable circular economy and transition into renewable energy sources.
Fantastic. Thanks, Patricia, and thank you to our four speakers for their opening thoughts. We've got some questions that are coming through on the live audience Q&A. So please keep typing those into the screen. We'd love to hear them. Some really important themes coming out from the four of you around the need to plan and collaborate, the need to think about interconnectedness and systems, and that really important one around integrated design for our infrastructure projects of the future. So let's kick off with a question around how different disciplines can work together. So somebody's asked the question, how can urban designers, landscape architects, engineers working on isolated infrastructure projects contribute to circular economy outcomes, and what are the best strategies? So who'd like to have a go at that? Ari, would you like to have a first go at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question and something that I've had to ask on a lot of projects. The term isolated is quite interesting because effectively when you have that many, I guess, different designers in a room, you can become quite creative and not feel so isolated, so to speak. I think on projects that I work on, what we try and do is take the idea of circular economy and consider it as a linear model is really inputs and outputs, and the sort of purpose of a circular economy is to have some inputs and some outputs, but really to limit the inputs and outputs and create a sort of circular system with what you have. So an interesting exercise that I often like to do is at the early stages of design, you try and define your inputs and define your outputs, and then try and determine links where potential circular economy opportunities could come about. A great example of this is that sites have an input requirement of, let's say, water, and an output of sites that everyone has to deal with is what you do with your rainwater. You have to do flood protection, stormwater treatment, and so on. And so an initiative like rainwater harvesting, which has become very standard in development practice, is a great opportunity to use circular economy. So to deal with something that you typically plan to get rid of, which is rainwater, and keep it and utilize it for non-potable services such as irrigation and toilet flushing to reduce your requirements for additional inputs and reduce your outputs. And the same goes with materials, with recycling. inputs like food, and then treating those to create treating organic waste to enable great benefits such as energy and biogas from organic waste, or composting, other things that I've looked at. So there's a wide range of sort of inputs and outputs that you think about on isolated projects that you can start drawing links between and identifying circular initiatives.
Fantastic. Phil, do you want to comment on that? As a design manager, you must find yourself in similar situations where getting strategies and getting teams to work together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think each discipline has their own sort of priorities, and I think there's a constant need to balance each discipline's competing values. So your engineering disciplines are trying to make compliance of geometric standards whilst keeping that balance within the right of way of the infrastructure and that need to purchase extra land. And landscape architects are looking for a spacious design where they can introduce regenerative design elements and planting that don't necessarily sit hand in hand with your engineering discipline. So you've got to allow that sufficient time in the design process to like Ari said, to balance your inputs with that final solution. And it really is a balancing act as you go through the process.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have a question from our live audience. So let me read the question, and then we'll identify who might like to talk to it first. So the question is the circular economy really a new paradigm or a new world order, as some have coined it, or yet just another new hype, as we have seen during the pandemic? So, gosh, there's a bit in that question. Marty, would you like to tackle that one first? So, is this all hype, or is this a serious way that we're all going to work together into the future?
Well, I think it's a question that may have a few right answers. I don't think it's a new hype. You look at use of recycled glass in roads. In Australia, we may think it's a new thing. It's been used in 1950s in New York. It's been used in 80s in Europe. 40 years ago. In Australia, I think it's a newer issue due to two main things in my view. It's a large country with a small population. There is lots of room to landfill things. In Europe, you cannot just go and say, okay, I'll go to the next suburb and landfill it. Land is just so valuable that you cannot do that. When I was researching recycled glass, you see some developing East Asian countries far ahead of us. They don't have the luxury of having a lot of land available to them, and they don't have raw material. Where you're going to dig to get sand and rock. In Australia, you go further out and you dig. So in Australia, it may look like a new hype, but I don't think it's a new hype. And I don't think it's the result of the pandemic. I think it's the result of the realization that, we have 60 million tires in Australia, and no one wants it. It either needs to go to landfills or to the creeks, or we need to find ways to use it. So I don't think it's a hype. It's the realization that even though this is a big country and a small population, our resources are limited, and waste is a serious issue. And we need to learn from others who have been doing it before us and also be more creative. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Patricia, do you want to have a go at that question as well? So, sustainable transportation, is that hype, or is that our future?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that the discussion on circular economy is the natural follow-up to the discussion on sustainability, right? That has been increasing in the past 10 years, but we are, okay, how can we make sustainability or being environmentally friendly economically sustainable? And that's circular economy, right? So I don't think it's a hype. It's here to stay, because we need to change the way we are doing things right now in order for the future to exist. So it's definitely not a hype. And I mean, again, whatever is the name we give to it, it's what's going to be necessary for us to continue, right? So, yeah, I think that's
fantastic. No, thanks for that. Now we have a question from Keith Clifford Bell, and Keith is asking about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and he's got a question here that the SDGs don't even mention circular economy. Are the SDGs failing, and are they poorly formulated? Can circular economy help restructure the SDGs? So, who'd like to have a go at that one? Phil, would you like to share your thoughts on perhaps the link between the United Nations SDGs and what it means for a circular economy?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it doesn't necessarily mention circular economy, but number 12 does talk about responsible consumption and production, which is circular economy. So, you can't necessarily look at one SDG in isolation. It's about how we balance all of them together. And those advocates for the SDGs and those that are in the detail of them know that, you know, there's the core. For me, in infrastructure, there's a core view in the center of the SDGs that we really focus in on to balance the responsible use and consumption of materials, but also balancing that with other initiatives that can provide sustainable cities and communities. So you have to bring it all together as a balancing act.
Fantastic. Ari, do you want to perhaps comment on that one as well, and maybe even on Phil's thought about is responsible consumption, is that a better name for circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, SDG 12 is certainly the one that closest links to circular economy, but things like zero hunger, clean water and sanitation are all elements of circular economy. I think that there's a sustainable design idea called regenerative design, which looks at the idea that resources are finite in this world, and that, I guess, to date, we have just been consuming under the assumption that it's infinite. And as Marty was saying previously, Australia is really fortunate due to our low population, but high amount of natural resources, that we haven't really needed to consider resource scarcity. But as I've worked in other places around the world where there's water scarcity or material scarcity, circular economy is much further ahead because they're trying to address a lot of these SDGs. So I think it's a sort of mentality shift in Australia, which needs to be considered about circular economy isn't just recycling, but it's understanding that our sort of pool of resources, while currently it may seem to be very large, planning for the next 50, 100 years, we've really got to start thinking about how do we reduce consumption, reduce our demand, reuse what we have, so that in the future, a lot of these SDGs can be achieved.
Fantastic. Listen, excellent thoughts around the really important framework that the SDGs provide, and really important conversations about how we critique and improve that framework going forward. So we have another question. So Chris McRae, what is the role or the need for government, local and state, in encouraging the introduction of a circular economy compared to simply allowing markets to evolve? So, Marty, you've spoken a bit about the role of the marketplace in recycled materials. Do you want to perhaps talk a little bit about how you see governments fulfilling their role in the circular economy?
Look, yes, I'll try to keep it short. I think my views is that we can't leave it to the market. Market has a place for it, but we cannot simply just leave it to the market. If we leave it to the market, I'll give you an example. The European recycled tire gets here to a fraction of price of the Australian waste tire for a wide range of reasons. If you leave it to the market, why would you use Australian waste? You can import it for a fraction of the price. I think the Victorian government, I'm not really familiar with the work of other local governments, state governments in Australia, but they have done an excellent work. You can see the recycling first policy, the development of Ecologic, the work Ecologic does. So there is excellent work that has been done. but I think far more needs to be done. I would add to what Ari said. I think a lot more needs to be done on reducing. The whole hierarchy starts with reducing. Okay, I do projects in reusing soft plastic. When I look at the resources that they come from, I think a lot of them shouldn't be even manufactured in the first place. So I think there is a big push that we should remember that in the waste hierarchy, reduction is at the top of hierarchy. You go to a supermarket, a lot of products that are wrapped in plastic, you look at projects, they don't need to be wrapped in plastic. So I think the government has a higher responsibility to start to tackle it right up there, minimize the production of the waste. And I would like to see more in that area. But I would like to commend the Victorian government for the excellent work they have done in the area of circular economy among the other local governments in Australia.
Fine. Patricia, would you like to comment on what type of circular economy projects you think might be favoured by governments and communities in Australia?
Oh, this is a difficult one, especially from my perspective. That is not necessarily in the recycling of materials or things like that. Is more non-tangible. But I think there has been a lot of proactive actions. So the government is being very proactive in trying to integrate, for example, sustainable transport measures with energy production. That's what I can talk about. So I do see that there is an understanding of this need, and there are actions being done to incentivize research, and especially collaboration between government, industry, and academia to work on projects that will have this circular economy approach to it.
Sure. So what about things like charging stations for electric vehicles? Do you see that as a government responsibility, or is that a market-led response, do you think, in the future?
I think it's a market-led in general in more dense areas. But as everything, you always have the lower density areas, and that then in these cases you may need to have government input and government action. But in high density areas like the metropolitan regions, you have the demand, so the market is going to be there, right? So fantastic. I think it's a combination, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, we're getting a lot of good questions coming through. In fact, we might have too many questions, which is a good problem to have. But Ari, let me ask you: is there a limit to a true circular economy?
Such a pessimistic question. I like to think not. I think that I saw a really interesting example recently in Sydney where a commercial building had a organic waste processing plant in the car park. So effectively, organic waste is put into this system where larvae essentially digest the food and create a fertilizer output. But then those maggots can actually then be used as food for fish. So if you sort of put an aquarium next to that waste management system, you could then feed the fish, and then those fish could feed the humans in the cafeteria upstairs, and then that organic waste could come down. And that's a small example, but a really interesting example of in the center of Sydney, a circular economy that is complete almost, producing a consistent circle of food. So I think that we really need to be pioneering, and we really need to stretch our thinking and be innovative when we think about circular economy. But at the same time, small pragmatic things like charging 15 cents to use a plastic bag at a supermarket will incentivize people to reuse their bags and bring their own bags, even though it's such a small cost. Adding extra barriers for single-use plastic at that small scale makes an enormous difference. So I think that while a sort of a limit may be perceived as right now possible. I think it's important to be innovative while currently being as pragmatic as possible.
Okay. Do you want to have a go at that one as well, Phil? I mean, it's got to be as simple as energy in, energy out, isn't it? It just keeps rolling on.
I think so, but in the true in infrastructure in particular, you're dealing with high quality, long life assets typically. So there's a need for the high value resources to get that performance for certain elements within the layers of the infrastructure. So in that sense, you might struggle to get that full circularity if you put the materials in, and then throughout the life of the asset, they become maybe contaminated through the process that they're in. So we need to think quite carefully of how we apply our materials and how they get used. And then do we introduce legacy issues with those materials? So we need to tackle that whole cycle of the material to understand if we can get full circularity.
Fantastic. Thanks for those thoughts. Very considered. Here's another question, and Marty, I might ask you this one. When considering circular economy projects, is the reduction of carbon emissions a key driver for consideration?
To unmute myself. I don't know whether it is or not, but it should certainly be. I have seen cases that they have used recycled product in a project, but they hold it for such a long distance that you look at it and you think, well, if you actually used virgin product, you would have been better off. So I think just simply using recycled product, it shouldn't be always looked after. Oh, it's the excellent solution. I think the carbon footprint should be considered, and the reduction in the carbon emission. And I think that's a much stronger indicator compared to, we just used some waste product. So I don't know whether it has been done in our projects or not. I think that's a question for the other panel members, but I think certainly it is a stronger factor to be considered.
Well, let's ask the other panel. Patricia, do you want to make some comments around carbon emissions in your area of specialty in transportation?
Yeah, definitely. Transport is responsible for a large share of carbon emissions, and there is a lot of this discussion. You are transitioning to electric vehicles to reduce the emissions of the vehicles, but how is this energy produced at first place, right? So this is an example that considering carbon emissions is very important, because for electric vehicles to be truly clean, you need to have energy sources that are not producing a lot of carbon emissions. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, solar or wind energy. So, yeah, I think, the way I see circular economy, that's mostly the objective, right? Is to make you zero emissions, or whatever solution that you select. That the overall impact, when you look at from an holistic perspective, is going to be zero emission. So you need to look at the entire life cycle and supply chain.
Fantastic. Okay, listen, we're churning through our excellent questions. Here's one that I might ask Ari. Does the panel have any experience of encouraging the circular economy with nature-based solutions or bioengineering vis-a-vis in infrastructure?
I have quite a lot of experience in wastewater treatment using natural methods, so using wetlands and constructed wetlands, and the benefit, I guess, of using natural methods for treating wastewater is the reduction of energy. So lack of need for mechanical services in the processing of the wastewater, and you essentially do a little bit of pre-treatment and then leave the water within a wetland, and then over time that water is treated through natural processes of sort of algae and bacteria eating away at the wastewater, and leaving it to a point where the water gets clean. Another good mechanism of circular economy like that is over time you can actually dry out those wetlands and use the sludge or the sort of residue at the bottom for composting, which has been done as well. So there's a lot of great natural initiatives that enhance circular economy and also reduce I guess ancillary requirements like mechanical interventions or electrical interventions.
Excellent. Thank you for that. There's a very specific question for you, Marty. From your experience in tyre recycling, what are your views regarding used lubricant oil refining back to lubricant oil?
Oh, look, I haven't, that's not really my area. I should be, and I know it is done in other applications. I've met people in workshops that they use waste oil and they filter it and they reuse it, but look, yeah, it's not really my core area.
No,
so
that's okay.
I know at local, a small scale, it is done. I know a small company in Melbourne that filters it and takes it to other place, but very small magnitude. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now we're getting close to time, and we've got more questions coming through. So we'll collect all those questions up, and I really appreciate our online audience for asking those, and I really appreciate the considered responses that our four expert panelists have provided. So we've come to the end of our discussion, and a fascinating one. To close, I have a quick question for each speaker. The question is, what is the one thing you want our audience to leave here today thinking about? So, Patricia, do you want to lead us off? Can you give us the one thing that you would like us to think about as we leave today's session?
Sure. I think I'll reiterate what I have been saying throughout my responses, and that is that integrating different sectors such as energy and transport, or could be transport and waste, is very challenging and increases even more the complexity of something that is already complex. As Felix mentioned, it's a systems of systems problem. So because of that, we are likely to procrastinate it and leave it as a long-term plan, right? However, I think it's urgent that we start embracing this as a systems of systems problem and try as quickly as possible to try to start some integration from all these different sectors so that we can really make circular economy happen.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Phil, do you want to give us your one takeaway message?
Yes, absolutely. I think really I want everyone to leave this sort of forum just really thinking about how they can set a plan to implement circular economy principles within every phase of the project. But individually, we need to take responsibility within our own disciplines to plan and apply the principles, and then work really proactively to collaborate with the people around us and other disciplines to make it a reality.
Super. Marty, would you like to share a thought, a takeaway for our audience?
Look, I don't really have a demographic of the audience, so I'll divide it in 2-3 categories. If, as an everyday citizen, and I've learned it early, every single item that we buy, or we have we are a decision maker in a project, just think about what's going to happen to it when the life finishes, okay? And I think if we just have that at the back of the mind, it will impact our daily life. We won't buy a lot of things that we buy because we know after 30 minutes it's just going to end up as a waste. I think the second thing I think for everyday citizen is, and I say it, I know it can be quite demanding, but we need to accept a degree of discomfort. If you're not going to use the cheapest plastic product in the market and buy a wooden item, then it's going to cost me $2, $3 more maybe, and it might be heavier. But I think to expect that nothing is going to be changed, I'm not going to pay more money, I'm not going to get uncomfortable, it's going to be exactly the same, I don't think we're going to go far ahead. But if there are decision makers in the room, people from government or consultings, I would like them to, and I've worked with excellent people, some of these products are new products. With every new product comes a degree of risk. Let's accept that, the fact that we want to change, we don't want to landfill this product, requires a little bit more work, requires accepting risk. Of course, those risks needs to be measured. There needs to be a risk mitigation plan, but we need to get a little bit out of our comfort zone. If each of us, from an everyday person that goes, when I go to a shop to buy something at the end of today, or if I'm an engineer or a decision maker making a decision about a project, we need to get out of our comfort zone. We need to think out of the box. And there is a lot of knowledge out there. It's just, the world has come a long way on circular economy. And I would also have a plea that we go beyond our close circle and start to look up for this knowledge. And there is a lot to learn. And hopefully that means we'll be in a better place compared to what we are now.
Fantastic. Thank you for those positive thoughts. So, Ari, what would you like the audience to take away this afternoon?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I completely agree with Marty's points. And I think, circular economy is achievable and sort of is being achieved currently. And it can only improve the more people that sort of get involved and the more sort of stakeholder engagement and coordination occurs. But if you look back to, I guess, designing for net zero, which is now become the business as usual, 5-10 years ago, that was considered as, can this be possible? Is this something? And now it's just what's done. No buildings today are being designed to not be at least net zero ready once they get constructed, and same with precincts. But I guess I want to throw another thought experiment similar to Marty's. If every person who's watching today imagine that they only had 1,000 liters of water that they could use for, let's say, the next month, how would they go about their water use then? How would that change their mindset on the way they treated water? And the same goes with, kilowatt hours of power and so on. So I think there's a mind shift required to look at resources that we use day to day as a scarcity and as a luxury, because they are being depleted. And the best way to sort of counter that before ideas of reuse or before ideas of anything is reducing consumption and putting a bit more thought into how wasteful are we being, and how can we improve our own consumption, and integrate that into the design work that we do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ari, and thank you to all our panelists. I'm just jotting down some notes to take away. So Patricia has told us waste is challenging and don't procrastinate. Phil's reminded us of the importance to take responsibility, to plan and collaborate. Marty's told us to think as citizens and to accept a degree of discomfort, but there is a lot of knowledge out there, which is really optimistic. And Ari, thank you for your thoughts too on getting involved, and I love the idea of thinking about, goodness me, if I had to use a limited amount of water per month or energy, we might actually think very differently about reducing the amount of energy and materials that we consume. But on behalf of our virtual audience, can I thank you very, very much, Marty, Ari, Patricia and Phil. the responses were really considered and I'm sure much valued by our audience. So thank you once again. Thank you to our audience for tuning in and for the excellent questions that were asked this afternoon. They're very much appreciated. We're excited to announce that our next panel conversation will be held on Wednesday, the 22nd of September. That must be getting close to the grand final, on the topic of geospatial challenges and opportunities for a sustainable future. So stay tuned for the lineup of really exciting speakers and that event. And please join us. You'll receive an invitation to the event in coming days. And we really hope that you'll register and really look forward to seeing you as part of that. So in the meantime, to help us improve our events, please complete the survey, which is available below the live stream. And thank you all very much, and stay safe. Good afternoon.